Good morning, everyone, and welcome to Sunday service. My name is Nayaswamis Sadhana Devi. This is my husband, Nayaswamis Jaya, and we are here. I guess you'd say we're here from Ananda village in India. It's hard to tell which one sometimes. I'd also like to briefly tell you that we have a guest here that we brought from Ananda village in India, but mostly India, Ananda, India. Blazy, would you stand up for a minute? This is Blazy Phillip. And she's been visiting Ananda village. So we might tell you a bit more about her later on, but for now, this is what. Go ahead. Yes, thank you. Last time I was here was in June, I believe, and the subject that day was Judas. Today we have Satan. Maybe that'll be the last, the last of the darkness for a while, I hope. Anyway, it was sort of interesting, what was it that made Judas do such a foolish, stupid thing that he did, and I guess we could say it was the satanic force. As Master said, he adds his testimony to those who went before him. Satan is an actual, something that actually does exist. Satan is not a figment of our imagination or someone else's imagination. Satan does, the satanic force does exist. Something comes to mind that I remember that happened when I was in India some years ago. We were giving a Kriya initiation at Yoganandaji's home, the most special place of all for us to give a Kriya initiation. And I was helping, with the Babaji drink and this and that, and those kinds of things. And just about everything that you could imagine went wrong, of course. The first thing that happened, as I remember it anyway, was all kinds of racket from downstairs, men yelling back and forth and the crashing things and stuff, making all this noise. And soon I saw people running up the stairs, carrying big pots on their heads and yelling louder and louder. And at the same time, we're trying to have a nice Kriya initiation right in the room right next to where I'm standing. So anyway, the person that I was working with was another American, so we didn't understand a word of what they were saying. Plus, they were speaking in Bengali anyway, and hardly anyone knew what they were saying. But anyway, they were making lots of noise. We managed to somehow communicate that could they be a little more quiet. And they finally got it, but that was only after about 5 more minutes of that. So that went on, and so that one sort of was worked out. But not more than 3 minutes after that, someone's cell phone went off with not only just a ring, but this loud yelling. That was the ringtone. She ran out of the room. She was so mortified, and she was trying to turn it off. And the other person who was with us kept saying, "Switch it off! Switch it off!" I'm trying. That finally went off. And okay, those were probably the most dramatic parts. But there was some spilled stuff, and I don't know. It went on like that all throughout the whole Kriya initiation. And it was so, disappointing, because here we were in Master's home, and everyone was expecting to have not only the people who were actually in the room with the initiation going on, but the rest of us were all expecting to have a really nice, wonderful, peaceful, uplifting Kriya initiation. But, well, I guess that was the satanic force there. That's what happened afterwards. I mentioned this to Gianna, and Jaya, the two of them who were the ones that leading the initiation, and I said that, and she said, "Satanic force, satanic force. Every time you try to do something good, isn't this often what comes up? Something, the opposite thing is going on." And so these are the kinds of things that happens. You never know, really, when it's going to catch you. And it's pretty hard sometimes to be ready for it. We know, as we probably all have experienced at one point or another. There's a saying that Master used to say, you can't beat out the darkness with a stick. You have to turn the light on. And that's usually what happens is we don't understand that. We're trying to sort of get rid of it, go away, and don't bother me, etc. But we have to turn on the light. We are, in fact, children of the light. And really, that's what all the satanic force is darkness. And our job then is to turn away from the darkness and turn to the light and bring the light in and share the light. And the more we do that, of course, the more we can, in fact, then bring the light in and finally, one day, reach our destiny of being one with the light, and instead of being attracted to the darkness, instead of that, the light will shine much stronger and draw us there into the light. Sometimes it doesn't seem to be possible. I went to a doctor one time and he told me what to do and take this medicine and so forth, and I did, and it didn't work, and I went back and I told him, and he said, you know, sometimes you do everything right and it doesn't work. I wonder why. Why is that you follow all the rules, it doesn't work? Something's missing. And I have a feeling that that something missing was part of Judas's problem as well. We need to remember that we're not the doer, that God is the doer. And we're the one, what we need to do is draw the guidance of God and the great ones as well as we can, to put our efforts not so much into doing everything exactly right by the book, every detail in place, without remembering that everything we do should be guided by God. And we need to remember to draw the guidance whenever we can be quiet enough to draw that guidance. This is the way that we will begin to be successful in our efforts, rather than forever sort of coming up against these brick walls or having these dramatic things happen right when we thought we had everything all perfectly arranged. This is what we need to do. Remember that God is the doer. We can begin, one of the ways we can begin to get away from this thought of I'm going to do everything, is to begin to learn to respond to life's things that it's thrown at us, to respond rather than to react. I was reading a book. This is a book which some of you might even have it in your library here. It was written by a woman who I believe is in the Portland community still. She used to be there. Her name was Lorna Knox. And it's a book about raising children. And she talked about helping kids to learn how to respond rather than react. Or at least not react. To take a minute, count to 10, do all these kinds of things that we can teach ourselves to do. And she gave this example, which made me really laugh. She talked about Charles Darwin had the idea that he was going to learn to respond and certainly not to react. And one of the things he thought he would do was this experiment on himself. He had a snake phobia. So he went to the zoo, and he went to the snake, whatever you call the glassed-in thing, like a big terrarium. And he watched all the snakes through the glass, and he was doing just fine, and they were doing whatever the snakes do there, and he just watched. And he probably was doing a lot of deep breathing, whatever. He was doing something to keep himself calm and watch the snakes. And then one of them struck at the glass, and it struck as though it was striking him. And he reacted just as he would have any other time. He jumped back, and all of the reaction. And he was quite disappointed in himself that he wasn't able to just take it in a calm manner. Here he had been working at that all this time and didn't do a bit of good. He just reacted just as he would any time. Well, of course, that kind of reaction is a natural thing that we have, and getting attacked by a vicious snake is a little bit unnerving, even if it didn't really attack them, attack the glass instead. And that reminded me, though, however, of an experience that we had on our family. Long time ago, our daughter was about, 6 years old or 8 years old or something like that. We went to the zoo, and this was the San Diego Zoo, and we were in the early morning, we were out walking around, and we were in the area where the big cats are. I really like cats, and so I thought the cats were beautiful, and they were huge. And the one that we were looking at this one point was a big panther, black one, I think. And he was pacing, just, as panthers do. He was pacing. And he was so pretty, and I was watching, and, he was in a big cage with a huge chain link fence. There was no chance that there was any problem. We were just watching, and all of a sudden he jumped onto the chain link fence, and a big snarl, and we all, the three of us jumped. I think we jumped about 3 or 4 feet each. And we all shrieked. And behind us, the maintenance man was walking along, and he said, "Don't worry about him. He just hasn't had his morning coffee yet." We were all laughing, and at the same time shaking. And the funny part is that our daughter, who's now in her 40s, still remembers that. That was the highlight of our trip to the zoo. Remember when the panther? Yes, we remember. But it was funny because it showed how quick we are to lose our ability to respond instead of react. We just only takes a second and we're reacting. But we can actually train ourselves by the practice of meditation. We do train ourselves to do this. We can put ourselves in situations. Well, Charles Darwin didn't have a lot of success at that, but we probably could if we really worked at it. Put ourselves in some kind of situation where we can test our ability to be calm in a situation that gets us all these kinds of things like this. We are children of the light. And to quote an old song from I think it's the 70s or 80s, "Beware of darkness, it can hurt you." And then that is not what we are here for. That is not what we are here for. We are here to come back to the light, to once again become one with the light. And we will get there. We will get there one day by learning one of the things, learning not to react, by practicing, finding when we are in situations, by thinking first without reacting. And so we want to continue to do this and continue this throughout our lives. We are Yogananda used to say, we are a bundle of self-definitions. I remember a story that some of you know, Savitri at the Ananda village. And I heard a story that she told years ago about herself when she was young, 12 years old or something like this. And she talked about how at that time, she was talking to her mother, and she was being sort of sad that she didn't have a boyfriend, and her mother said something like, Oh, don't worry, honey. You're only 12 years old. You've got some time. Don't worry about this. You'll grow up, and I know that you'll get married one day. I think you will. And she said, now, you could marry a rich man or a poor man, an intelligent man or a simple man. My advice to you, honey, marry a man who can fix things. I thought that was good advice too, and I had already married a man who could fix things, so that was okay. I didn't need to worry about that. My whole family were full of people who could fix things. It would have been really awful if I had not married a man who could fix things. And it reminded me how I sometimes when I'm here and he's in India, he comes home and I give him a nice long list of things to fix. And I say, I'm so glad I married a man who can fix things. Yeah, right. Well, this is fine. He knows how to fix the faucet and all that kind of stuff. That's great. Some people are the kind of people who are so identified, self-defined, that they're people who fix things. They fix a lot more than faucets and all sorts of that kind of thing. There's something in them that needs to fix other people's lives for them, that needs to fix situations, and is really kind of overly identified with the ability to do that kind of thing. And this is the sort of thing that we need to give up. To not be so identified with what we think we are, what our idea of ourselves is, to be able to let it go to some degree, as much as we can, from lifetime to lifetime. One of the best ways to let go of self-definitions is to see yourself not as a person, not as a personality, not as an occupation, not as somebody with these faults or those qualities or those talents. To see yourself only as light, or one of the other aspects of God that we often talk about, the sound of Om, for example, or peace, some of these. Try to see yourself as that. And one of the nicest exercises to do is to visualize yourself in the sea of light or peace, however you want to do it. Visualize yourself at the end of your meditation. See yourself in that, and mentally let yourself, what you see of yourself, whether it's your body or your personality, whatever it is, let it slowly dissolve into that. Dissolve into light, to become one with the light. I like to do these visualizations, which a few times a week I do an online meditation for India, and it's a guided meditation, and at the end of the meditation, that's what we do. We do that little visualization. Peace, light, Om, whatever they want to do. Let go of each one of all of your, whether it's your body, your personality, your likes and dislikes. Let them all go. Return them all back to God, you might say, and become only one with that aspect of God. This is one of the easiest ways to transcend your ego attachment, because that's what we're all trying to do here, is through our practices to let go of our attachments, our self-definitions, and to be who we really are, which is one with the light. Jaya. Oh, I did have one little thing to say. This is advertising. This is during Spiritual Renewal Week, we had kirtan with Dharmadasi and Nirmala. It was wonderful. It was the best I've been to in years, and it's been recorded. So that's the advertising part. I'm not sure when it's going to be available, but soon, I'm sure. And I would highly recommend that you get the recording to listen to.
That lady in Calcutta who had that phone, what the phone was saying, it started out very quietly, whispering like we do the affirmations, until finally at the last it was on full volume. And it was with the person yelling, "Answer the phone, answer the phone, answer." It was like that. I could demonstrate it, but it wouldn't be. And she was so embarrassed. Last year I was in Calcutta and I was giving a lecture there. And afterwards a lady comes up to me and she says, "Do you remember me?" I says, "Yeah, I recognize your face. Remind me. Kriya ceremony, Master's house, the phone." We have a bond. So, anyway, on today's topic on Satan, I was whenever I come to the center here, the community, we come down the street there, Coloma, and I know I'm close because we passed the church, St. John Vianney. And I always like that because, of course, Swami used to quote St. John Vianney, "If you only knew how much God loved you, you'd die for joy. You'd die for joy." And I always remember that when I come here, and it reminds me of that. And I thought, that's obviously something very appropriate also for today's topic. If you only, in terms of a remedy to the topic of Satan, evil, darkness, if you only remember how much God loves us, you die for joy. Because what is the antidote for dark forces? It's that love. And you could even say, some people might say, that darkness is just an absence of light, or that satanic force, evil, is an absence of love. And if you knew how much God loved you, you'd have that joy. But I said you might say that, but it's not quite enough, because what Master said is that actually it's not just an absence of love, that there's actually a consciousness to it, consciousness to that darkness, and that we have to be aware of that and be careful with that, because the absence of light, darkness has its own reality. It's not just an absence of light, because there's a magnetism to it. And you might think of it in this way. Think of negativity. Do you ever notice, if you're real observant, negativity has a magnetism to itself? In other words, there's a certain, there's an attraction to it, put it that way, attraction to being negative. Think of people gossip, maybe, or you say something negative, somebody says something negative, and you don't like it, but on the other hand, it pulls. It has a pull to it. And particularly it has a pull to those people who are in tune with it. If you have a certain attraction to it, it's something that stimulates you. And I find that, I think this topic of avoiding those negative currents is very important to us, because in little ways they begin to pull us and we don't even know it. And little by little we get pulled into something. I remember years ago, my mind tends to be a bit of a skeptical at times, or analytical maybe. I kind of see things in a certain way. If I notice a picture on a wall, I can see it a little bit out of tilt, and it kind of bothers me. And I thought, tilt that thing back up, just a minute amount. I can sometimes see it. That type of mind isn't always helpful. And so sometimes I would find myself playing the devil's advocate. Now, that's an interesting use of term. devil's advocate. Now, sometimes, of course, somebody's got to sometimes say something if something needs to be said. But then I began to notice, why am I always the one that's saying this? And it became a habit. I began, I play the devil's advocate. And is this good? And now, in isolation, each one of those instances may have had some validity to point something out, but yet you do it again and again and again. Pretty soon you become the one that's kind of interjecting the energy that brings something down. It's just like, the person that, points out the little flaw in the situation. I don't want to be that person. But we do it sometimes. Little things like this, we get caught into these little forces that are little in themselves. They don't mean anything particularly, but building up time after time, pretty soon you have a habit. You're the skeptical one, the one that's pointing this out, that out. You don't want to be that way because it begins to attract to you. You begin to be drawn into a whirlpool of that, and you begin to attract those sorts of forces that are in tune with that. Why not be the one, and you can do this consciously, to say the positive thing. And you'll see this is when Master is talking about, and Swami's talking about in this reading, we align ourselves mentally with forces. And it's said that, what Master said, that this satanic force, this negative force, is a cosmic principle. In actuality, this world would not exist if that principle wasn't there. Something has to keep this world in motion. Otherwise, everything's drawn back into God. And so you have to have this. In India, they call this the force of Maya. And without that Maya force, everybody's back into God. Now, that would be very nice. But God would end his enjoyment of this play if it kept on dissolving back in. And so consequently it plays that. But yet we don't want to be the one that's caught in that, because it's our goal to be drawn back into God, to go back to God. I'd like to tell a little story, because sometimes you talk about these, a topic like this, and it has a little bit of a depressing side of it. But I want to talk about this one fellow who he was drawn down into the dark places after death, but the devil kicked him out. Are any of you baseball fans? Okay, we got a few. Now, of the baseball fans, anybody from Chicago? Well, something significant happened last year. After 108 years, now it's a significant number, after 108 years, the Chicago Cubs finally won the World Series. Well, there was this one fellow, of course, before you can play in the World Series, you have to win the pennant. You see, the National League versus American League. You have to win the championship of the National League, the pennant. So the Cubs won the pennant, qualifying them to play in the World Series. And this one fan was so excited, he had a heart attack. He had a heart attack and he died. Yes, this is true. He died. And he went down into the netherworld, and there he was, and he didn't quite know why he was there, but he was a good fan. He was a cheerful fellow, but it was probably because he was a little bit too attached, and he had a little few things to work out. And so, but nevertheless, he found himself down there, and he was happy because his last memory was of the Cubs winning the pennant and being able to play in the World Series after all this time. And so he was happy and had a smile on his face. Well, the devil saw him and said, "What are you smiling about?" And he said, "Well, the Cubs won the pennant." And so he said, "Well, I have a big pile of rocks here for you." He sent him over to a pile of rocks. He says, "I want you to break these big rocks into little rocks, and the little rocks into gravel, little rocks." And so he sent him off to the rock pile for eternity. Well, the fellow was on there, and he was hitting the rocks, and a little while later, the devil comes back with his assistant, And he notices this guy's whistling. And he sends his minion over there, and he says, go find out what's going on. And so the assistant devil goes over there and says, why are you whistling? He says, this busting these rocks reminds me of working on my daddy's farm when I was a boy. And that dirt was so hard. It was so hard I had to use a pick. And whenever it got very difficult, I'd turn on the radio and I'd listen to the baseball game. And this reminds me of listening to the Cubs playing and winning those baseball games, and makes me happy. So went back, told the devil, and the devil says, well, turn up the heat. So they turn it up, and a little while later he comes back and Phil's pounding the rocks and he's whistling. And he says, okay, assistants, what is it this time? Why are you happy? He says, well, you see, this reminds me of back in the summers on my daddy's farm. I'd be out there in the working on the farm. It'd be so hot. It'd get so hot, but it was summertime, so I'd turn on the radio and I'd listen to the Cubs playing on the baseball game. And it just reminds me of that. Cubs won the pennant. And so okay, he comes back. The devil says, one more thing. Baseball isn't played in the winter. Make it cold. Snow and ice. And so comes back a little while later, and there's snow and there's ice down. The guy's out there working away, and he's shivering. But he's he's trying to whistle. He's happy. The devil this time goes up to himself. What is it? He says, well, sir, he says, my daddy reminds me on being on my daddy's farm. And he said, when hell freezes over, the Cubs will win the World Series. And the devil says, get him out of here. He's out of here. Because the devil cannot stand a cheerful soul. He can't handle a cheerful soul. Had to get him out. And this, in a sense, is when there's a message here. How do you drive out the devil? You can't do it with the stick. You have to bring the light. Now, everything in life, the spiritual path, and it's elsewhere in these readings that we read on Sunday, that all religions talk about the spiritual path as a quest. It's an ascent, something that we have to, it's not a slide down into heaven, it's an ascent up to heaven. We slide down to the other place. Isn't it so easy to slide down? Why is it so hard to go up? You have to work at it. And the reason is, it's an ascent, is because we have to use our will. It's those things that we have to consciously use our willpower to be able to, in little ways, to go up that ladder. And so consequently, we have to be conscious to be able to use our willpower, but there's always a little bit of effort involved in order to make an ascent. Now, God's grace is there, but God's grace removes some of the obstacles when we use our will. We have to engage the will in order to counteract that negativity in life, whatever it is that's holding us back. But we take that little by little, and I think the spiritual path, substance of it, much of what we do, the lessons that we learn, the decades go by, we look back, what did I learn? And we learn some very basic things. Environment is stronger than willpower. You put yourself in the right environment and you find somehow your will is a little bit more easy. In other words, you can do those things that you set your mind to do. You can continue. You can hold on to the routines. Have you ever, I shouldn't even have to ask this, but have you ever got up in the morning and not wanted to meditate? Oh, I'm just so tired. Or maybe that, maybe not that, but have you ever tried to meditate and said, oh, I'm not sure. I don't want to do my Mahamudra. I don't want to do my energization exercises. I don't want to do all of the things that are asked of us in this path. I'm sure we've all felt that way. Have you ever got up in the morning, rolled over, looked out, it's raining outside? I don't want to go to work today. Something is like that going to face all of us. And we have to think of it this way. Every time you're faced with those obstacles, the tendency is to say, I don't want to do it. I'm not going to do it. And every time you accede to that, a little bit, your will has been weakened a little bit. Now watch during your life, the day-to-day things in your life, when you're challenged, should I rise up to this challenge? Should I help that person? Should I do what's being asked of me? Should I take the extra step? Should I do, Or, yes, I will. The yes-saying principle, which Swami always talked about, saying yes to life, versus the no-saying principle. Those things that, no, I'm not going to do it. I don't want to do it. And you'll find that if you could say that these streams of consciousness, of positiveness and negativeness, you could say they're streams, like entering into a stream, a river. And if you put your toe in, then your foot, and pretty soon your knee, and pretty soon you're up to your waist, and the current gets very strong and it carries you. It works both ways, positive and negative. And you find it begins by just putting your toe in that water. You say, that wasn't so bad. I missed, I skipped, I didn't go to work, I gave in. You find that little by little you begin to build those habits. But if you do it the other way, and you face that challenge, I'm going to go to work today after all, or I'm going to do X, Y, Z, you find that you get stronger. What I have I think as a devotee, having been doing this quite a long time, you learn some very simple, useful things. And one of them I learned is, now as I've gotten older, I've been struggling with Mahamudra. This is an exercise we do before we practice Kriya. It's a stretching exercise, stretch the spine. Because as I got older, my body is not getting more limber. It's actually going the other way. It's getting less limber. And so I thought, oh, I don't like that. I have to fight it. I have to fight it to keep my... And so sometimes in the morning, I go down to the temple and I said, I'm not going to do this stretching exercise. Wait a minute. And so I sit down and I says, I don't want to do it. Yes, you do. No, I don't. And I'm fighting. And then I say, well, I'm going to do one. Do one. And once I do one, I said, come on, I'll do the rest of them too. And it works. Same thing with energization exercises. Same thing with getting up in the morning. I get up in the morning, I get up fairly early. And I don't want to get up. But I says, all I have to do is make it from here to the shower. And I get up and I go to the shower and I turn the water on and I'm awake and ready to go. Little things like that. If you can find in your day-to-day activities things that'll help you to be able to reinforce your willingness muscle, say, yes, I'm going to do it. And resist that tendency to say no. When I was younger, I used to work in construction and that sort of thing, and outdoors a lot. And sometimes in the morning it would be cold and rainy, and I didn't want to go to work. A lot of us didn't. The whole crew sometimes didn't want to go to work. But many of us, when in some of our work crews, we had this rule with some of the crews I'd work with. We would, whatever the condition is, it would not matter. We're going to go. If it's still bad at lunchtime, we'll go home. But we will always go in the morning. And sure enough, oftentimes you get started, looked real bad, hour or so later, clouds would go, sun would be out, and everything would be fine. But do those little practical things that are going to help you be able to say yes. And avoid those things that say no. And it starts with the small things. The seconds and the minutes are more important than the big things. And don't make your decisions when you're not in a good mood. Often I've heard people say, well, I don't go to this function or that function, which is a good thing for them. They should go to it. I don't go, or I don't meditate, or unless I'm inspired. You ever heard somebody say that? Do you know? Yes, but I only go when I'm inspired. Well, it's like a kid, you know. I only go to school when I'm inspired to go to school. But it's by going to something, a spirit, that we get inspired. And what happens is people tend to make their decisions in life, important things, spiritual decisions, at times in their life when they're not inspired. And I think if I could give a piece of advice to somebody, don't ever make an important decision in your life unless you're in a good mood. And the temptation is to make the important decisions in your life when you're in a bad mood. It stimulates action. I got to do something about this. And wait. Turn yourself around, put yourself on a higher octave, and then look at the situation. Should I? Because sometimes action is required. But do it in a good mood. The consciousness that you are in will determine the karma that you will put into place through your action. And karma that is motivated by bad mood motivation is going to be different than the karma that's going to result from positive mood motivation. So if you want to, you might say, counteract the devil, remember the story of the Cubs fan. Be in a good mood. The devil cannot stand a person in a good mood. And you'll see this too. Negative situations, people, they don't really feel comfortable about being in the presence of somebody in a good mood. And they'll either change, or they'll moderate, or they'll hold back. It takes you being in the good mood, which is an act of will. Don't wait for circumstances to make you in a good mood. Be in the good mood, and you'll find that the circumstances will then follow and mirror that mood. Many blessings.